At the turn of the millennium, for the dawn of the golden age of MMORPGs, 3 longtime developers from Blizzard Entertainment left the industry titan to form their own company, Triforge Games. You had Mike O'Brien, formerly a lead programmer on Warcraft 2, Warcraft 3, Diablo, StarCraft. There was Jeff Strain, the lead programmer on World of Warcraft. And last but not least, there was Patrick Wyatt, the man who paved the way for Battle.net and the implementation of multiplayer in StarCraft and Diablo that helped propel Blizzard to massive success in the mid to late 90s. Patrick Wyatt also happens to be my favorite of the 3 because of his blog Code of Honor that I have read over and over again and even reference later in this video. I'm also going to reference it right now. Did you know that Patrick actually credits Mike O'Brien with the idea and prototype for Battle.net, including the decision to make it free? Thanks, Mike. This was a stacked leadership squad with the exact kind of experience you'd want from a company hoping to break into the game development industry. Gabe Newell, founder and president of Valve, once called them really, really smart in a Q&A, so that should tell you the kind of people we're dealing with. The guys at Triforge had 2 things on their mind in the early days of the company. First, we gotta change this name, guys. This name sucks. And second, oh god, we need so much money. In 2002, they solved the first of these problems by changing their name to ArenaNet, which is suspiciously similar to Battle.net, but I'm not going to sue them. And that same year, Korean developer and publisher NCSoft, who were known mostly for making the MMORPG Lineage, which was wildly popular in the East, was looking to get a piece of some juicy Western MMORPG ass. The first ass they got their hands on was Richard Garriott. Garriott was the creator of the iconic Ultima series, including Ultima Online, a game credited with creating the MMORPG genre as we know it. He also has a literal human skeleton in his basement. NCSoft acquired Richard's new studio, Destination Games, and began funding Richard's next hit MMORPG, Tabula Rasa. When you think about it, it's the perfect plan for NCSoft. It had no chance of failing. There's no way Richard Garriott could make a bad MMO, and he certainly wouldn't do it twice. But just in case, NCSoft invested in another Western company working on an MMORPG, ArenaNet. To fund the creation of ArenaNet's first major project, NCSoft gave the developers $6.5 million. Adjusted for inflation, it's more now. So with the funding secure, Mike, Patrick, Jeff, and the entire ArenaNet team spent the next 3 years working on, promoting, and eventually releasing an online RPG genuinely unlike any other. That game was Guild Wars. And it fucking rocked. In case you don't know who I am, I'm Idle, the president of MMORPGs. Thanks to a recently stolen election because of all of my patrons, thank you so much by the way, I can now talk to you for, oh goodness, oh gracious. Look at that video length about Guild Wars, a game that is really old, but also really good. But a key part of understanding what made Guild Wars so special is understanding the context around RPGs and MMORPGs when it came out. No, get that out of here. Do you know it's been 20 years since Guild Wars came out? That means it's been 2 full decades since we've gotten a game as good as Guild Wars. But luckily today's sponsor, Southern New Hampshire University, can help turn anyone into a game developer with the tools needed to make the next Guild Wars. SNHU has one of the largest accredited nonprofit online degree offerings in the country. That means you can learn almost anything there, but if you're watching this, game development might be your jam. You'll learn the fundamentals of programming, 3D modeling, texturing, before moving on to industry standard topics like physics engines and AI. You remember how Gabe Newell called the Guild Wars developers really, really smart? Well, they were, partly because they all went to college, like Jeff, who went to Trinity University, which costs, oh goodness. Okay, so good news, SNHU doesn't cost that much. It's actually extremely affordable. In fact, it has one of the lowest online tuition rates in the entire country. So the barrier to entry for learning computer science, game development, or whatever else your heart desires has never been lower. To get more information about the game development program and SNHU, go to snhu.edu/idle or click the link in the description. And thank you again so much to SNHU for sponsoring this video. The late 90s and early 2000s are some of the best best years ever for RPGs. I mean, we were getting games like Baldur's Gate 2, Knights of the Old Republic, Jade Empire, Neverwinter Nights. This is just a list of BioWare games. They were really good at making RPGs. The RPGs of this era were defined by massive worlds with incredibly immersive stories and sometimes really complex systems that would take you a little bit to understand, but when you did, you could create builds that could breeze through the game, or make some more challenging builds and have a great little time with your great little silly little build. It was also a time of rapid innovation for RPGs. We were seeing the move from 2D graphics to 3D graphics that allowed us to experience these worlds in a whole new way. And at the same time, we were starting to see the emergence of the first ever MMORPGs. EverQuest, Ultima Online, RuneScape, Star Wars Galaxies, Asheron's Call, World of Warcraft, the list goes on and on. Dozens of massive multiplayer RPGs were hitting the market every year, almost all to some degree of success, and some to levels no video game had ever seen before. Full worlds where you were constantly surrounded by other real players who you could fight with or against as you completed quests, leveled up, or gambled your life savings on a death roll, because statistically you're due for a win any game now. This is getting ridiculous. But despite sharing 3 whole letters of the acronym, MMORPGs and RPGs of this era were pretty different from one another. MMOs tended to focus on grinding and individual character progression more than overarching stories unfolding in the game like RPGs did. You weren't going to mistake your playthrough of Morrowind for an MMORPG. The whole game feels different. I mean, this guy isn't a real-life conscious human. He's just an NPC, right? He can't feel pain. But in 2005, Guild Wars would hit the shelves of GameStop stores everywhere, and it attempted to bridge the gap between MMO and RPG. A game that could bring hundreds of thousands of people together in a traditional RPG setting. A game that was able to focus on a story with a beginning, middle, and end. A game that was totally unique in the growingly saturated MMORPG market. And Guild Wars, in my opinion, did that. It is, for the most part, a standard mid-2000s RPG, but with the community, the grinds, and the lasting impact of an MMORPG. Alright, let's undress the elephant in the room. Great, now that that's done, let's address a point of contention with Guild Wars. You see, Guild Wars isn't really an MMORPG. And despite the fact that I've already said MMORPG 15 times in this video, I never really called it an MMORPG, and neither did the creators. Guild Wars 1 was classified as an online RPG, and for good reason. It doesn't have a lot of the major MMORPG elements. Most MMORPGs you're probably familiar with involve walking around a big open world where there's players in it at the same exact time as you, doing whatever the hell that is. Anywhere you go, any quest you're doing, whatever you're killing, there might be another player right behind you, ready to strike. But Guild Wars 1 works more like Path of Exile or Diablo 3, where hubs and towns serve as kind of central locations where you can see and interact with other players, but when you leave those areas, you're given your own private instance of the world to explore. You can group up with other players in the towns and then go out into the world together, but then it will just be your party. You're not going to see random people out there. And actually, just like Path of Exile and Diablo, you might even run into rare monsters out there with cool names like Craze or Swag or Slur. The business model for Guild Wars was different from other MMORPGs too. Most MMORPGs had monthly subscription models at that time, but Guild Wars was based on a buy once, play forever model. Well, forever as long as the servers are up, which so far has been 20 years, so hey, pretty good value. And we all know you can't be a real MMORPG unless you had weird YouTube videos that would go viral and were kind of just big inside jokes for the community that enjoyed the game, and Guild Wars actually did have that, but I digress. The intention for Guild Wars was to meet up with your friends, or, get this, meet new people in the town to form a small party of 4 to 6, depending on the zone, and go out on an adventure. Think of it like filling your Knights of the Old Republic party with a bunch of your friends instead of some stupid, plot-centric, sexual awakening-inducing NPCs. I don't need to feel these feelings. I was 9 years old when I played this game. Better yet, imagine if you could fill the party with a bunch of strangers. Sexual awakening inducing strangers. It's definitely not what most people would look at and describe as an MMORPG, but Guild Wars is still lumped in with MMORPGs of that time because, well, I don't know, it kind of is an MMORPG when you think about it. Its similarities to that genre are what got so many people interested back in the day, and its differences from MMORPGs are what have helped keep it alive almost 2 decades later. I think ArenaNet managed to create a special blend of MMO and RPG that, to me at least, is what makes this game so great. If you want the Guild Wars world in a standard MMORPG package, that's what Guild Wars 2 is for. And while we're on the subject, it's worth mentioning that Guild Wars 1 and 2 are fundamentally completely different games. They do share a world and some story elements and even a few game mechanics, but otherwise, totally different games. Forget about Guild Wars 2 right now, okay? Don't even talk to me about Guild Wars 2 anymore. But enough about MMORPGs. Let's talk about Guild Wars. You know, the actual game that this video is about? This video is about a game called Guild Wars. Guild Wars 1 is technically a trilogy with 1 expansion. The trilogy consists of Prophecies, Factions, and Nightfall. Each of these entries are kind of like their own games taking place in different parts of the world, with mostly new characters, new skills, and new mechanics. You start off each campaign with a new character specific to that campaign, but eventually you do gain the ability to bring in characters from your other campaigns as well, because there are points where the stories start to converge. The 1 expansion, Eye of the North, is literally an expansion. You don't create an Eye of the North character like you do for the Trilogy campaigns, you take an existing character and travel to the expansion. For the record, the Eye of the North expansion is good. I'm not going to talk about it though, because the Trilogy, it's the Trilogy. We want to talk about the Trilogy, it's the best part. The first campaign released with the release of Guild Wars was Prophecies, and therefore a lot of people might think it's a logical place to start learning the game. I mean, it's the first campaign, boot it up, get going, what could go wrong? Well, we'll get to that later. In Prophecies, you get to choose from 5 classes, which are known as professions in Guild Wars: Warrior, Ranger, Monk, Necromancer, Mesmer, and Elementalist. I definitely just counted off 6 professions. I don't know why I wrote 5 in the script. Twice, I wrote it twice. I'm sticking with it. These 5 professions, known as the core professions, are available in every campaign in the trilogy, but Factions and Nightfall both get their own exclusive professions: Assassin and Ritualist in Factions, and Paragon and Dervish in Nightfall. That brings the total profession count to 9, which is a lot, to be honest. Well, it actually brings it to 10, but who am I to change the script? Each class has a few attributes that typically affect your attack power or the potency of your abilities. For example, the Sword Mastery attribute on a warrior will increase your damage with swords. Your Tactics attribute will make certain skills, like your shouts, last longer. What's really nice is that each skill has information in the tooltip to tell you what attribute it's affected by, and the green number in the tooltip shows you what will be modified by that attribute. It's an incredibly concise way to give out a ton of information all at once, and I never had trouble understanding what abilities corresponded to what attribute. After you pick a profession and get through the character creation, you'll get a quick cutscene showing you the Kingdom of Ascalon. It just so happens to be the last day of this kingdom's existence. Coincidentally, it happens to be your first day. This beautiful green kingdom and all of its farmland is what's referred to as the pre-searing area, and it basically serves as the prologue and tutorial for the rest of Prophecies. For most players, this will be the way they learn how Guild Wars 1 works. It also happens to be the worst tutorial of the 3 campaigns by a long shot. I don't want to offend Guild Wars veterans here, because the pre-searing is a very iconic area in the game, but it doesn't do a very good job of teaching you Guild Wars, in my opinion. Every campaign has its own tutorial area, since they're designed to each stand on their own. When you create your first character, you can pick whichever campaign you want. You don't have to start with Prophecies. Factions and Nightfall, the next 2 campaigns in the trilogy, both have larger, more fleshed out tutorial areas that are meant to walk you through multiple aspects of the game before launching you into the main story of that campaign. Prophecies, while still having a very large tutorial area, only has a few required quests before you're allowed to move on to the rest of the game. This normally wouldn't be a problem, since games these days are so much more straightforward compared to RPGs from the 90s that assume you had a pen and paper next to you taking notes the whole time, but Guild Wars is a complicated game. There are over 1,000 skills spread across all of the professions. There are conditions like bleeding and deep wounds, enchantments and curses and hexes that will cause you to lose health or attack slower or stop you from moving. There are resources like energy and adrenaline. There's so much to understand, and it's just so much. There are a ton, and I mean a ton, of side quests scattered around the pre-searing tutorial area, some of which reward you with new skills for your chosen profession, but more importantly, they all reward you with a hefty chunk of XP that will level you up. And leveling up in the pre-searing area is extremely important. If you're not at least level 7 by the time you leave the tutorial, you're going to have a much harder time in the actual campaign. It won't be impossible, but it won't be as smooth as it should be, and I could see it turning some people off to the game. This tutorial area explains very few of the non-essential things to you. The only thing you're actually forced to do before you can leave the tutorial is pick a secondary profession, which, oh god, yeah, I haven't explained. Yeah, in Guild Wars you actually get 2 professions. When you create your character, you pick your primary profession, and you're gonna get all of the attributes and the skills for that profession. But then very early on, you're going to pick a secondary profession, and you're gonna get some of the attributes and also all of the skills for that profession. So now you don't only have 9 professions, but you have infinite combos, I assume. I can't really do the math. So you're gonna have to figure a lot of stuff out here. But the good news is that you'll be given a quest by the profession trainers in the tutorial, which will let you try out some of the profession skills before you lock in your choice. The Elementalist trainer will have you use your AoE spells to fight off a ward of ice elementals. The monk trainer will have you escort an abbot through a toxic cathedral, forcing you to use your new healing spells to keep him alive. Oh, I guess I forgot to keep myself alive. Okay. These quests are, in my opinion, really great ways to make learning about the new professions easier and less overwhelming. But if I did have to nitpick, it'd be that these quests are really time-consuming, and the trainers can be several zones away from each other, making it a slog to try out new professions, only to have to leg it back to the original one you wanted in the first place. The Nightfall campaign, the 3rd entry in the trilogy, takes this to a different extreme, having all the trainers in one concentrated area, each willing to let you try out some of that profession's skills without any quests necessary. It's really all a matter of personal preference, and I would understand people who really enjoyed the flavor of the quests, but it can all just be a little much when you're just starting out. Well, it might be a little much, unless you read the official strategy guide. You did read the official strategy guide, right? It was on the required reading before this video came out. Well, I'm gonna have to fail you, and you know what that means. Death. No. You see, Guild Wars came out at a different time for not just RPGs, but games in general. Times when you have to go to the store, buy the game, drive home, and while you're in the back seat while your parents drive you home, you read this, and then you get home, and the CD has to install the game. Yuck, time to read the strategy guide. That's what this is. That's why we have this. And frankly, if you didn't get the strategy guide, then I'm not sure you were a real guild head in the first place. Guildheads are what we call Guild Wars diehards. You wouldn't understand. Unironically though, this strategy guide is amazing, and I used it through my whole playthrough of the first campaign. It has everything you could ever want. A world map? Check. All of the skills available in the game? Check. Notes from the actual developers of the game telling you about some of their favorite parts of it? Yeah, it actually does have that. Like Tammy, a level designer who likes being a necromancer. Thanks, Tammy, I'll consider it. This thing even goes into detail on some common online gaming terms that you might run into in the world. Like grinding, the process of staying in the same area and killing the same monsters over and over again. Or noob, a pejorative to put someone down. Or even PST, which means please send tell, or in other words, is telling someone to directly message you. I actually learned what that meant from this book. I thought that just meant psst, like, hey, whisper me, psst. The point is, Guild Wars is a complicated game, and I unironically ended up using this even though I just waited 3 weeks for it to arrive as a bit, and now here we are. If you can get one off of eBay, hey, maybe do it, or probably save your money. Actually, probably don't get this, just Google it, just Google everything. I don't want to make it seem like I think the pre-searing area is bad. I just want to make it clear to anyone who might be interested in trying out the game that maybe that's not the right place for you to start. I don't want people to try Guild Wars and bounce off of it right away. It's a game that is worth the investment, and that's just what I want to make clear here. I think it's still very enjoyable. Anyway, with your profession combination set, you can get into combat, which at first glance might look like your standard tab target ability bar MMORPG combat, but in reality, it's pretty much, okay, yeah, it's pretty much that. The combat itself is somewhat uninteresting, at least when it comes to the easy early encounters. You click on a creature, use whichever abilities you see fit, and get loot and XP. But what actually makes the combat interesting is down here. You probably think, yeah, you just showed me that. Also, I've seen this in World of Warcraft, or Hello Kitty Online, if that has an ability bar. But in Guild Wars 1, these 8 slots are all you ever get. And that is really intentional. At first, this isn't much of an issue, but you'll start learning new skills really quickly, and you'll need to make some decisions. You want to be able to do as much damage as possible, but you also need to balance your resources. Maybe you want to bring some self-healing, or maybe you have a healer with you who you trust enough. For example, warriors have a very small energy pool that they can use to execute their skills, which isn't a big deal because they primarily use a resource called adrenaline that they gain from dealing damage. So you might make the decision to take a skill off of your bar because it uses energy and keep another because it uses adrenaline, or vice versa. Luckily, at towns and other hubs throughout the world, you're able to freely change not only the skills on your hotbar, but also all of your attribute points, and you can even save loadouts so you can quickly switch between different builds that you've made. Oh, by the way, build means the type of character you play and the skill set that goes with that character. That's in the strategy guide. You should really be reading the strategy guide. The ability to quickly switch between builds is really important, not only to try out new things, but it helps you plan for certain encounters. If I die on a quest a few times because I get overwhelmed by monsters, I might consider switching to an axe build for the cyclone ability that hits all the foes near me. If I feel that my party is taking too much damage, I might buff my tactics attribute and bring Watch Yourself, a shout that increases the armor of the whole party. The whole system of figuring out builds that worked for certain situations quickly became one of my favorite parts of this game. It adds another layer to combat that no other MMORPG I've deeply experienced has. You still have to worry about positioning to get off your AoE skills or focusing down and interrupting healers before focusing on the tanks, but those are systems that are present in a lot of other games too. Guild Wars brings something unique to the table. It also means that no two people who are playing as the same main profession are going to be playing it the same way. There's a very good chance, unless you're looking up the meta builds, that you've decided to value skills differently, or maybe your playstyle is more aggressive while theirs is more defensive. It's a lot of extra customizability that lets you express your playstyle through a whole number of ways. But combat isn't perfect. Oh god, is it not perfect? It's worth remembering that Guild Wars was released in 2005, almost 20 years ago, so it's going to have some parts that are just a smidge rough around the edges, and one of those things is the movement system. You see, in Guild Wars, you're able to walk forwards, backwards, left, and right to your heart's content. You're basically a god of the X and Y axis, a master of the two-dimensional plane. Your only weakness is slight inclines. You can save the world, but don't you even think about a 5-foot drop. You can't jump in Guild Wars. If there's a fence, you have to walk around it. If there's an incline that's just a bit too steep, you'll have to find a path up. If you want to drop off a small cliff to get from point A to point B faster, there's an invisible wall stopping you. This can be a bit jarring coming from more modern games where you can run around to your little heart's content, but it's not really a big deal in the grand scheme of things. Until you're walking around the map and you start getting hit from above, which isn't a problem for ranged classes, because they could just cast their little spells or shoot their arrows, but who has two thumbs and chose to play a warrior? This guy. Guess I'm going on a run to try and find these monsters that are killing my friends. Oh, but why did you do it? Why did you pick warrior? Why didn't you pick a ranged class? It's so much better. They're so much stronger. Because the strategy guide explicitly recommends it for new players? Why would you recommend I experience such tremendous torment in scenarios that, while uncommon, are not particularly rare either? Okay, it's fine. The strategy guide is still worth buying because it does tell you a lot about the main part of Guild Wars, the missions. Missions are what set Guild Wars apart from any other MMORPG out there. They're the main story driver for Guild Wars and allow the game to deliver the story in a way that no other MMORPG is able to because of the mechanics. To move forward through the story of Guild Wars, they just take quests and throw them out the window and say, don't do quests anymore, we're doing missions. Here's how they work. Missions are pieces of content that require a group of players to complete, and unlike quests that take place in the open world, these take place in their own isolated mission-specific areas. Unlike the open world, these areas are much more linear, where there's usually a correct path for you to follow through the mission. In these missions, there's one primary objective for you to complete. There's essentially no side quests. Your only goal is to do whatever the primary objective is, and the primary objective can be anything. For example, the first mission in Prophecies is pretty straightforward. You go north of the wall to go scout out the Char army. The Char, by the way, are the bad guys. That's all you really need to know. You fight your way to the end of the mission map where you eventually do discover the Char army. Great. What now? Mission complete? We did it? We went from one end to the other? No, because we actually mess up and we get spotted by the general. Oof, I knew that was gonna happen. I had a feeling. So now you enter phase 2 of the mission, where you have a time limit to find a new way back to the safety of the wall so you can prepare for the invasion. Here's the thing though, you're being chased down by a ton of char right now, and you better run. Like, there's no fighting here. You just gotta leg it. I mean, seriously, do you see how many char are chasing you? You'd have to be a complete idiot to try and engage them. It's just not the way to do this. Because missions are constructed so specifically and in their own areas, they can do cool objectives like that. Future missions will have you do things like destroying separate ballistas or ballistae, so that your ally Prince Rory can get by on a separate path. Or they might have you travel to a fallen city to solve some puzzles within and eventually kill a boss that can just turn into different classes on command and heal itself? Okay. Dick. Some missions are a little bit more annoying, like they'll have you escort this prince guy all around the mission, and he just kind of goes off and does his own thing and pulls monsters all the time, and it's really annoying. The good news is, he dies, and we're happy about that. This is a good death. In future campaigns, missions become a little bit less separate from the world map. For example, in the Nightfall campaign, you'll be able to travel outside that fallen city I talked about earlier, but only in the mission can you go inside. It makes it really cool and helps connect the open world to these missions, so it's actually really well done in my opinion. And I know what you're thinking, one objective? Lame. I wish there were bonus objectives. Good news! Each of these missions also comes with bonus objectives you can complete completely optionally. These bonus objectives will give you a nice additional chunk of XP for completing them and help add some variety to the missions. But the most important reason to complete them is the shield that pops up at the end of the missions. If you complete the main and bonus objectives in a mission, a shield will appear with 2 awesome swords sliding in to signify just how badass you are. But if you only complete the main mission, only 1 sword appears. This might just be because I scored super high on the Rad's R test, but this really throws me off and is actually the main reason I completed every bonus mission I came across. Missions are, bar none, my favorite storytelling mechanic in any MMORPG I've played. They take you across the world of the game, through wastelands, mountains, jungles, and more, all while delivering a full story to you that you as the player are actively participating in. And the best part is, it's all designed to be played with your friends. Me and my friends cleared like 6 missions in one sitting one time. We were laughing the whole way as I was busting iconic jokes that I think we'll all look back on very fondly as we grow old. Well, as I grow old. They're not gonna grow old on account of, well, you know, they're robots. That's right, the party I've been playing with throughout all of these clips, they're robots. Specifically, they're henchmen. You see, there's a slight issue if you want to play with a bunch of people in Guild Wars these days. There's not a whole ton of players. Don't get me wrong, there's still an active community you can be a part of, but odds are you won't find a lot of people running the same missions as you right when you happen to be doing them. That's where henchmen come in. Henchmen are NPCs that you can invite to your party who fill certain roles for your team, like healing or tanking or doing AoE damage. And you know what? They're not half bad. They do a decent job of using their toolkits and keeping you alive, and they even act like real players when they accidentally pull a monster. Look at this guy just running around like a chicken with his head cut off while I desperately try to pull aggro off of him, but I can't because he's running away. It's a real MMO experience. Henchmen have been around since the launch of Guild Wars and were intended to be used to fill gaps in your party. Like if you and a friend wanted to play just the 2 of you, there is no need to go scouting for 2 more people to join your party. You could just invite a couple of henchmen and be ready to go. I think it's fair to say that henchmen may have taken something away from the social experience back in the day, but the fact of the matter is that missions require a party, and it would be exhausting even when the game was at its peak, to find players to play with for every single one. And now, henchmen are part of the reason this game is still playable and enjoyable today, regardless of the population. I'm really glad they exist, and I think it was a really smart addition for ArenaNet to make considerations to people who didn't want to find full parties or even just wanted to play alone. When the 3rd campaign, Nightfall, was released, you eventually unlocked characters called heroes, whose skills, attributes, gear, and secondary professions you could fully customize. You could even tell them if they should avoid combat, be aggressive, use a certain skill, stop using a different one. They're basically more powerful henchmen. It's at the point that you unlock heroes that Guild Wars really starts to play like a classic RPG, similar to Baldur's Gate. Before an encounter, you're gearing up your whole party, tossing buffs around, making sure they have the right skills, etc., even though you're the only one playing. And that's fine. It's fun. Sure, it starts to really deviate from being a multiplayer game at that point, but there's still the PvP scene, which is fully Oh my god, have I not talked about the PvP scene yet? Oh my god, I'm this far in the video and I haven't even mentioned like the biggest part of this game's history. I'll get to it later. Unironically, one of the most fun moments I had in this game was when I was struggling through a mission that was particularly undead heavy until I found out that the undead are weak to holy attacks. So I made sure to gear one of my heroes with almost exclusively holy spells, and then we breezed through the mission with no problem. It was a lot of fun. It felt like a real RPG. Thanks, Guild Wars. Basically, Guild Wars is a completely solo game with a cooperative option, at least as far as the story missions go. And that's okay. It's a really fun game to play, and the fact that you can boot it up whenever and play, or get some friends together for a session is awesome, and has helped preserve the game for 2 decades. I'm thankful it has these options, or else I wouldn't have been able to revisit the game fully like I've been able to for over 100 hours, because there's just so much to see. While missions are the only thing you strictly have to do to progress the story, I think you'd be selling yourself short at least a little bit by not exploring the rest of the open world, because not only is it unironically beautiful in a way only a game from 2005 can be, but it's also a lot of fun in a different way. Running around the open world of Guild Wars, you'll find plenty of other non-essential quests. Most of these can feel a little bit like standard MMO quests, where you have to deliver a message from one NPC to another, kill a monster for an item, or kill a certain number of monsters. But unlike missions, which are on linear maps, these all do take place entirely in the open world, where there's more to see or do and unlock. You'll find more of those named monsters and more chests containing awesome loot. And you'll be taken all around these massive zones because, oh god, these zones are literally, they're huge. I don't even know how Arena had the time to make all of these zones. Like, I mean, I can go from here to here to here to here. I hope I edited that to make it seem like it was really far. I'm just staring at my script as I'm saying this. And it literally takes like 30 minutes of straight running to get between places on the map if you don't use fast travel, which in the first campaign is pretty likely since the fast travel points aren't exactly close to one another. The sheer size and scale of the entire Guild Wars trilogy, but especially Prophecies, is what makes just one campaign take 71 hours to beat for most people. And that's if you're only focused on the main story. Factions and Nightfall take at least another 60 to 80 hours on the main story themselves. And when you consider all the extra side quests and grinds you could do, you easily have 500 hours of content in the trilogy alone. Again, doing the side quests is optional, but they're rewarding, and it's also just fun. You might unlock new skills that you can use in future builds, or you might just get some cool weapons and XP. The game is going to be long either way, so you might as well just stop and smell the roses. Most of what I talked about so far applies to all 3 entries in the Guild Wars trilogy, but it's important to note that this game evolves quite a bit from Prophecies to Nightfall. Not just mechanically, but on the surface as well. Both Factions and Nightfall explore entirely new continents with different inspirations. Where Prophecies started in a standard European medieval fantasy, Factions takes place in Cantha, an East Asian fantasy setting, and Nightfall is set in a North African-inspired continent. Do you know how rare that is? A game, let alone an MMO, that explores North African fantasy, including entire classes that are rooted in that inspiration. It's extremely cool and also ends up being one of the best settings in the trilogy. The decision to set each storyline in vastly different environments does a lot for Guild Wars, and I actually find it to be one of the strongest parts of the game as a whole. It opens up new storytelling options as the writers are free to explore different mythologies, cities, and historical events for inspiration. More importantly, it stops the player from feeling like they're running in place, playing the same story over and over again. The value of visuals and context changing around game mechanics, even if the mechanics stay exactly the same, is so important, and I feel it's sometimes an underrated part of games, especially MMORPGs. But under the surface, both Factions and Nightfall do play a little different than Prophecies, and it's worth mentioning. Factions was released exactly 1 year after Prophecies. That means a solid chunk of its development was done with the feedback the Guild Wars team had gotten on the first campaign. Playing through it now, it seems pretty clear to me that the feedback they may have taken to heart was the speed of the game. First of all, the tutorial area is much more fleshed out as a true tutorial in Factions, whereas the pre-searing tutorial area for Prophecies was almost exclusively filled with optional side quests. The tutorial area of Factions still has those side quests, but is mainly filled with missions. I personally think this is a much better system since it doesn't allow for players to accidentally find themselves in an area they have no chance of surviving in with no option to go back. That means players who start with factions will be able to understand missions as soon as possible. In Prophecies, there is a chance you get into your first mission underleveled and you're not able to go back to the tutorial area to continue grinding. You're going to have to find another way to level up. That's not an issue you're going to have with factions. But one big reason you're not going to have that issue is because leveling in factions is like really, really fast. After going through Prophecies, which, well, you know, I decided to try and focus mainly on the missions for factions to save myself time because I have a video to make. What I expected is that I'd be underleveled and would have to take breaks to side quest at times, but no. On the tutorial island alone, I reached level 9. That took hours of side questings and Prophecies, but tutorial missions alone got me there in factions in under 2 hours. The missions themselves are also way more streamlined, which isn't a bad thing, it just is what it is. There are players out there who hate how fast-paced Factions is, and others who can't stand how slow Prophecies is. I personally don't mind the variety and pacing because, well, I had just finished Prophecies, and I kinda liked the faster pace going right into Factions. Nightfall, on the other hand, approaches its tutorial in a weird blend of Factions and Prophecies, and actually introduces something that neither campaign had before: grinding. Nightfall introduces a mechanic called ranks. In reality, ranks had been a thing for a while in Guild Wars, like as far back as Prophecies, but Nightfall actually forced you to rank up with a specific faction. In this case, you need to either reach a level milestone or rank with the Sunspears, the soldiers who defend the continent Nightfall takes place on. Either way, the only way to do this is by grinding. You can get these Sunspear ranks by collecting bounties on certain monster types and by completing side quests, so you'll be out there hunting scale and plant monsters for honestly a pretty long time. It took me until level 9 to finally get the rank of First Spear I needed to finally do just the second mission in the campaign. This took not an insignificant amount of time, but it was actually fun for me. As a reminder, this is all still happening on the tutorial for Nightfall, so just some context of how long this tutorial is. The Nightfall campaign felt like ArenaNet's shift to more standardized MMO tropes, something they would do more fully with Eye of the North expansion and obviously Guild Wars 2. I really like it personally because Guild Wars is the kind of game I can comfortably sit there and play for hours on end. Grinding to me felt like a nice break at times. Grinding can get a bad rap in a lot of RPGs, and I totally understand why, but I do think at times there's a place for it, and to me, this didn't feel super out of place. The point I'm trying to get across here, though, is that the 3 campaigns, Prophecies, Factions, and Nightfall, all do play very differently from one another, beyond just the obvious, like the additional professions available in each, but they're still a part of the game. They all still feel like Guild Wars, and all 3 are worth playing again if you have the time. I know what you're thinking. I have a ton of free time. I'm watching this video. You think I'm busy? Good point. You might be concerned that you beat the campaign of Guild Wars and then it's just like over? It's done? You win? I mean, kind of if you want, but there's way more to do afterwards. As far as I'm concerned, Guild Wars is an MMORPG, and as we know, MMORPGs basically begin when you finish the main story or leveling up, and there's a lot of the same concepts for Guild Wars. In a typical MMO, you probably move on to the end game where you can do raids or dungeons or other things that give you really good gear. But Guild Wars doesn't have an end game, at least not in the same way. So what are you supposed to do, you ask? You forgot about the essence of the game. It's about the guilds. I mean, it's called Guild Wars, guys. Come on, you thought I wasn't gonna talk about guilds? Guild Wars is kind of 2 games in one. You have the RPG, which is actually 3 games in one, and then you have the PvP, which is like the rest of everything. I think it's fair to say that PvP is what gave Guild Wars the legs that it had back in the 2000s, which was not the case for a whole ton of MMOs out there. There's a whole slew of different PvP types out there. You can do 1v1s or random 4v4 death matches. You can do a capture point game. You can do alliance battles. You could grind the Heroes Ascent PvP game mode so you could work towards your hero title, which ends in Legendary Hero, which a lot of people want. Unfortunately, you probably can't do this one because from what I've heard, it's botted to hell, so maybe don't do that one. You could do competitive missions, which are literally like the missions from the campaign, except there are 2 teams, one as the bad guys, one as the good guys. Each team fights to complete their objective, which is usually in direct opposition to the other team's objective. Like I said, there's a ton of PvP options out there, but None were more iconic probably than guild battles. Guild battles were 8v8 pre-made game modes where two guilds would go at it in a deathmatch where the point of the game is to kill the other guild's guild lord. The first guild to defeat the other guild's guild lord wins, and they are forever enshrined in the history of the game forever. Seriously, back in the day, guild battles were one of the main ways that guilds gained notoriety in Guild Wars. The other way was by uploading in-game choreographed dances to YouTube and trying to get hundreds of thousands of views, which somehow usually worked. I'm not even joking. I watch these all the time, and they're somehow still kind of entrancing. I really, this is amazing. To be honest, these days PvP has quieted down a lot. That's kind of normal though, because there's a lot less players. But you can still very easily find Discord communities that organize guild battles every day or alliance battles and death matches every week. Guild Wars PvP is still alive, you just have to seek it out. And if you do, you'll become part of a really cool community. And if PvP isn't your thing, Guild Wars has plenty of solo achievements to offer. You can grind the gold and materials needed to craft prestige armor like the Elite Dragon armor. Sure, it has the same stats as the other endgame armor, but it's expensive and it looks cool. I mean, seriously, you're gonna look at a grind that's entirely about fashion and tell me this game isn't an MMORPG? Or maybe you hate yourself and you're the kind of person who wants to try and beat an MMORPG. Well, you can grind the God Walking Amongst Mere Mortals title, or GWAM for short. The GWAM title requires maxing out 30 different title tracks. Title tracks are basically achievements like completing every single mission in the game, or completing every single mission in the game in hard mode, or killing every monster in every area of every campaign. Getting the GWAM title on a character is an insane grind, but one that is a status symbol in the community, and in a way, a sort of endgame achievement in a game with no endgame. What I'm saying is, there's a lot to do in Guild Wars after you finish the campaign. There's a reason this game remained popular for years after its release. Hell, there's a reason people are still playing it today, me included, and I'm really glad I was able to. As I was playing through Guild Wars, experiencing parts I never did as a kid, or getting nostalgic for areas I remembered fondly, I couldn't stop thinking about how great it was that the game is still available, with a strong community backing it. Most MMOs from those days, especially ones with sequels, get unceremoniously shut down, only to be revived by a host of different private server communities with varying degrees of rampant racism. And yet, here Guild Wars is, just as beautiful as the day its last expansion dropped. And it's because even years after the game's prime, developers at ArenaNet still care so deeply about it. Back in 2017, the Guild Wars 1 servers exploded. No, like seriously, they actually exploded. The server racks, they exploded. ArenaNet's tech director at the time, Stephen Clark Wilson, and developer Bill Freist worked together to not only migrate Guild Wars to the cloud, but also fix the bug that caused the issue in the first place. It was normal maintenance to keep the game afloat in whatever way they could, but it's worth mentioning that a lot of companies would have seen it as a cost-saving measure, an excuse to shut the game down permanently. But instead, Stephen and Bill took an extra step. Both Stephen and Bill had a ton of responsibilities, and none of them had anything to do with Guild Wars 1, but they still took the time to fix a bug to make sure it wouldn't happen again even after they migrated the servers. And then they took an even further step. They reached out to the Guild Wars 1 community and asked them what they'd want to see changed or added to the game. 12 years after the release, they were still motivated by this game and the community to improve it. The Guild Wars 1 community flooded them with responses, and Stephen and Bill started working on, for the first time in years, making meaningful improvements to Guild Wars 1. For example, in 2018, they'd release a graphics overhaul to Guild Wars that finally let players do crazy futuristic things like playing in windowed full screen or increasing the render distance. Changes that might seem small on the surface, but altogether helped breathe life back into Guild Wars and make it more welcoming to new and returning players. And maybe more importantly, it was a sign to the community that there were still people in control who cared about them and the game they still love. Stephen and Bill did these changes all in their spare time while continuing to work on their regular responsibilities. It was a passion project for them, and I can only hope they understand how meaningful their work was. Bill Freist left ArenaNet in 2019, and the Reddit thread announcing this is one of the most upvoted on the subreddit, just behind the guy who dropped 23,000 coins in individual piles on the ground and crashed his PC. The comments are filled with outpourings of love and support for Bill, thanking him for giving Guild Wars a second life. Steven also left ArenaNet for parent company NCSoft, but he recently announced that he's spending the majority of his time on Guild Wars, both to perform maintenance and bring new updates to the game. Bill, Steven, and the entire Guild Wars community are proof of how special this game is. It took me seeing a random sale on Steam to finally revisit the game for the first time in over 15 years, but I'm so glad I did. When we look back and remember the golden age of MMORPGs, we often see the names like World of Warcraft, EverQuest, The Lord of the Rings Online, RuneScape, and a few others. Rightfully so, those were all iconic and great games, and some survive even today. But I find that Guild Wars is one of those games that for some reason has kind of faded from the public consciousness when it comes to that topic. Understandably, I mean, it has been overshadowed by Guild Wars 2, but Guild Wars is still there. It's still on its original servers, and there's still people playing it, and it's still a really good game. Whether you play it alone or with friends, in my opinion, it still remains one of the best RPGs and MMOs ever made. It's a special game, and I think it deserves its flowers, not only for what it was, but what it continues to be 20 years later. That's why I felt so compelled to make this video and to talk about Guild Wars for too long. I don't want this game to be forgotten because it doesn't deserve to be forgotten. And if I can do any small part in shedding more light on how good it still is and how good that community still is, then I'm more than happy to do so. Because, damn, this game rocks. So I hope this at least in part inspired you to give it a shot for the first time, or maybe revisit it. But not you. You don't get to play the game. Because you watched this whole video. You're at the end, and you didn't even subscribe? Yeah, no Guild Wars for you. Instead, public execution. Okay, bye.
Hey, you're a patron. Thank you so much for your support. Hey, you're a patron. I like you very much, cause hey, you're a patron. Patreon is where you're at. You went to the URL in the description and you gave me your money, and that's pretty neat. Hey, you're a patron. Thank you so much for your support. Hey, you're a patron. I like you very much, cause hey, you're a patron. Patreon is where you're at. You went to the URL in the description and you gave me your money, and that's pretty neat.